The story commences with a man in the midst of a live stream, adamantly declaring the authenticity of the unfolding events. The chat section erupts with disbelief, drawing comparisons to a movie scene as the man pivots his camera to showcase a colossal monster. Chat participants question the reality of the spectacle, noting its absence from mainstream news outlets. Elsewhere, a man watching the stream drops his phone and rushes to his balcony, his expression a mixture of terror and fascination as he looks upwards. Reflected in his eyes is a massive, ominous figure with hands clasped together in a prayer-like gesture. The man stumbles backward, explaining that to understand the present situation, he must rewind to the beginning, specifically 3 years prior when he was starting high school. The narrative shifts to 3 years earlier, where the protagonist is walking down a school hallway towards his first-year classroom, specifically Class 3. Upon entering, he observes a student asleep while the rest of the class briefly turn to look at him before quickly facing forward again, seemingly recognizing him. He internally comments on the extremely awkward atmosphere and wonders if he should choose a seat in the corner. Selecting a seat, he sighs, feeling overwhelmed by the new environment. He considers that the classroom is likely filled with a range of emotions: nervousness about the unfamiliar setting, indifference, ambition for the future, casual entertainment consumption, and tardiness, but none as profound as his impending confusion. Suddenly, a window materializes in front of him. He rubs his eyes and does a double take, but the window persists. It welcomes him to the school and conveys a peculiar task: collecting ghost hands to gain special abilities, while also mentioning a demon king. The protagonist questions if he's been indulging in too many video games. Just then, an announcement over the intercom declares a campus-wide blackout and limited electricity, resulting in the entrance ceremony being relocated to the courtyard. Some students in his class react with annoyance to the change in venue, but none seem to perceive the window before the protagonist. He wonders if it is invisible to everyone else as they begin to move into the hallway. He determines that it must be a status window, jokingly referencing a fabricated study claiming 80% of men can see them. Nervously scratching his neck, he questions his sanity on his very first day of school. He proceeds to the courtyard, noticing the window remains. He is perplexed by its content, which references mysteries, urban legends, and ghost stories, subjects he has no interest in. He notices a second page option and reaches out to interact with the window, but is abruptly startled by someone yelling at him to line up properly. He decides to prioritize the ceremony for now and wonders if he can dismiss the window, which promptly disappears. The principal takes to the microphone and begins to address the students, but his speech falters. Mid-sentence, his head starts to swell rapidly, eventually exploding like a zit, splattering brain matter onto the ceiling and floor. The students are rendered speechless, as is a professor present. The protagonist sits in bewildered confusion, questioning the bizarre event. A teacher approaches the railing to check on the principal and is horrified to find him headless. She screams for someone to call emergency services, but as she attempts to dial, she begins to forget the number. Simultaneously, she and several others also start to swell up and explode like zits. Students scream and flee in panic, declaring their need to escape. A teacher attempts to restore order, urging them to wait, but he too starts to swell up. Numerous other students also suffer the same gruesome fate. The protagonist witnesses the horrific scene unfold right behind him and starts to run, desperate to avoid becoming the next victim. He frantically considers escape routes. Some students reach the front gate, only to realize it remains closed. Seeing that the gate is inaccessible and with the explosions continuing behind him, he considers climbing the school wall, but observes panicked students pulling each other down. He realizes both the front gate and the walls are too congested and he risks being trapped in the mass hysteria. He searches for an alternative escape route. A side door suddenly opens, and a security guard emerges, inquiring about the chaos. He witnesses the students fleeing for their lives and the mob attempting to scale the school wall and shouts that it is too dangerous. Nearby students rush towards the guard, demanding he open the gate. He questions their sanity, and out of fear, they become aggressive, mobbing him and insistently demanding the gate be opened. The unnamed protagonist questions the guard's stubborn refusal to open the gate despite the evident emergency. The commotion at the gate inadvertently creates more space at the wall. With the exploding phenomenon drawing nearer, he decides against becoming a casualty and runs towards the wall, leaping and grabbing onto the railing. A student grabs his leg, begging not to be left behind. He kicks the student away, telling him to get off. He cuts his hand on the sharp edge of the railing, then jumps over the wall to safety. He reflects that fate, like a ghost, appears unexpectedly and disrupts ordinary life, and that he was unknowingly already infected. His vision darkens as his head inevitably explodes. A window appears, declaring his death and informing him that he will restart at a previous checkpoint. The scene loads, and he wakes up screaming in the classroom, clutching his head, and looking down to find the same welcoming window reappearing. The other students glance at him, speculating about his mental state, suspecting he's playing a prank, and laugh, calling him interesting for his first day. The protagonist is utterly confused, finding himself back in the classroom with the same students as before. He questions if it was a dream, but the experience felt too real to be dismissed as such. The recollection of the horrific events churned in his stomach, making him nauseous. He questioned the reality of his situation, pondering if he had truly been sent back in time. The entire scenario, from dying and returning to the past, to the persistent window, felt disturbingly like a game. Just then, the intercom crackled to life once more, repeating the announcement about the blackout and instructing everyone to proceed to the courtyard. June's head throbbed as he clenched it in his hands. This was undeniably real, he thought, and he needed to figure out how to alter the course of events. The status window, he reasoned, must hold the key. Fortunately, the window started to display text, offering some guidance. However, he had initially missed its significance. The window declared it his first day of the next 3 years at school. For most, this would be an exciting prospect, but for him, it was far from it. He understood that this school was anything but ordinary, and a sense of impending doom hung heavy in the air, suggesting more bizarre occurrences were inevitable. Still, it was the start of a long 3 years. He noticed the window now presented a tutorial, tasking him with making 3 friends and starting a club to earn 10 ghost story points. He scoffed at the game-like nature of it all, yet the excruciating pain of his head exploding was undeniably real, not some virtual sensation. He wrestled with what to do next. Their teacher was, yet again, forcing them to the courtyard. He wondered if the same horrific incident would repeat, or if he was simply losing his grip on reality. Lost in his internal debate about the nature of reality, he glanced back at the wall he had previously jumped over. Being at the back of the crowd, he realized he could make a quick escape if things went south again. He resolved to run at the first sign of danger. The principal began his welcoming speech, expressing his happiness at their attendance, but precisely as before, his head exploded, showering the air with blood and gore. Instinctively, June spun around and bolted, leaving the bewildered students behind, still waiting to see what would happen next. He knew he had to get through the gate before panic set in and everyone else tried to flee. He glanced back and saw the students were already hot on his heels. They were fast. An idea sparked in his mind. He yelled to get the security guard's attention. The guard emerged from his office, asking what all the commotion was about. June pointed at him and shouted to the pursuing crowd that the guard had the key to the main gate and they needed it to open it. The security guard froze, realizing the crowd was now descending upon him, demanding the key. With his plan successfully diverting the mob, it was time for him to move. Instead of attempting to climb the wall again, he chose to scale the gate itself. He jumped down on the other side, stumbling on the landing. He couldn't afford to relax yet, he had died here last time. He sprinted down the street, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the school, but abruptly collapsed and lost consciousness. He awoke in a hospital room. Opening his eyes, he was met by the sight of figures in hazmat suits. He learned about the Nung High School 300-person head explosion incident. The government, assuming it was an infectious disease outbreak, had quarantined the area, and he was one of the few survivors. His parents rushed into the room, visibly relieved to see him. They embraced, and he learned it had been 10 days since the incident, days filled with media and police inquiries before he could finally see them. He eventually returned to a semblance of normal life, but the status window remained, a constant, perplexing presence. Now, back in his room at home, June stared at the window, still unable to decipher its true meaning. His mother's voice called out to him, informing him that tomorrow was his graduation and urging him to sleep early. He sighed and reached out to close the window. He realized it had been 3 years since the horrific incident, and the window had haunted him ever since. He switched off his light, reflecting on how he had tried to ignore the window, despite the tutorial's suggestions to make friends and join clubs. Nothing had come of it. He convinced himself it was just a persistent hallucination. But as the clock struck midnight, the window's text changed. Graduation day has arrived. The Demon King has been resurrected. His phone buzzed with an emergency alert, jolting him awake. He looked out the window and saw people across the city gazing upwards, wondering what was happening. The opening scene of the live stream now made chilling sense. The giant monster, the Demon King, had indeed appeared, and June realized with dread that it was near his closed-off school. He collapsed to the floor. The status window was real. At that moment, he felt an unnerving gaze, a sensation of making contact with something immense and terrifying. His body began to shut down, his senses fading, leaving him with nothing but pure, incomprehensible psychosis. In a way he couldn't grasp, he died again, receiving a bad ending for ignoring the warnings and turning a blind eye to the window. The window displayed starting regression, and the scene reloaded to his previous save. He jolted awake, still in his school uniform, and looked down to see the familiar window. The intercom announcement began again, while the students around him grumbled and complained, just as before. He noticed the student who was always worried about his future glancing around the room before reverting to his NPC-like demeanor. June trembled with fear. It was happening again. He had thought he had moved past it, become numb to the memory, but it was as vivid as yesterday. The classroom door slid open, and his homeroom teacher entered, asking why they weren't outside. He remembered her rushing them out the last time as well, right before the chaos. She instructed them to stand up and wake up. One of the girls in the back of the room appeared overly nervous, and the boy with glasses also seemed terrified. June wondered why they weren't waking her up if the teacher was telling them to. He turned to see her, sighed, and thought, okay, then. He internally categorized the other two as herbivore types and the sleeping girl as closer to a carnivore, at least based on their appearances. He assumed they must be afraid, but he stood up, feeling mentally older after living through 3 more years, making their current anxieties seem ridiculous to him. He decided to demonstrate maturity and reached out to the carnivore girl, but then stammered incoherently for what felt like 5 minutes, unable to form a coherent sentence. The herbivores seemed to realize they had sent someone ill-equipped into a dangerous situation. The girl didn't even acknowledge him. June internally lamented his failed attempt to appear like anything other than a girlfriendless loser. He couldn't even talk to women. She finally raised her head, glaring up at June, who was clearly intimidated. She pushed her chair back, stood up, and walked out of the classroom. June thought she was going to hit him. Their homeroom teacher watched them through the windows as they walked down the hallway, remarking that the other classes were already outside. June began to seriously consider what he should do differently. He remembered how things unfolded 3 years ago, and if things continued on this path, it would lead to the same disastrous outcome. He realized he needed to change something to avoid the disastrous outcome he had already experienced twice. He called out to his teacher, explaining that standing in the courtyard might be difficult for him as he was anemic. The teacher looked at him skeptically, remarking that he didn't appear anemic as he wasn't particularly thin. He clarified that anemia wasn't related to weight. The teacher seemed unconvinced, but he pressed on, arguing that if he collapsed, his parents would make a huge fuss. This seemed to resonate with her, as she considered the potential trouble. She agreed to take him to the infirmary. They walked to the infirmary, and once the teacher left, June peeked out into the hallway, relieved that she was gone. He closed the infirmary door behind him, stating that he had already died twice and had no desire for a third time. He reasoned that if this situation was game-like, there would surely be clues in his classroom, and checking wouldn't be too unusual. He cautiously opened the classroom door, surprised to find the 2 herbivore students from earlier inside. He asked them what they were doing there. The girl, awkwardly attempting to explain, said that after the teacher left, the red jacket girl, Jean, had returned to the room, so they had followed her. June admitted they were more daring than he had initially thought. The boy with glasses cleared his throat and pointed out that June was no different, then inquired about his anemia. June quickly confessed that it was a lie, brushing it aside, and suggesting that they seemed to be in this together now. He proposed they gather and discuss things. June thought this was a better approach. Figuring things out alone was pointless, but by talking, they might uncover something useful. He introduced himself as Lee June. He learned that the glasses boy's name was on Gang Il, and the other herbivore girl was Yoon Seona. June internally noted that Gang Il literally meant glasses in Korean and decided to call him John for simplicity. He asked why they hadn't gone outside either. Yoon Seona, or Sana, said she was smooth-brained, but the status window popped up, indicating that June's understanding of Sana had increased by 5. June muttered that it was yet another game-like system. John explained that he hadn't left because he remembered a ghost story about school announcements during blackouts. Intrigued, June asked about it. John recounted the story. During a blackout in evening classes, the sudden darkness startled students, but an announcement followed, directing them to the courtyard. While most students went outside, the top student in the class stayed behind. The second-ranked student asked her why she wasn't leaving, wondering if she was still studying to maintain her top rank. The top student slowly replied, asking if they hadn't noticed, and how a broadcast could even be possible during a blackout. June and Sana were confused and asked if that was the entire story. John confirmed that was it, asking if June had heard it before. June said it sounded vaguely familiar, inquiring if there was more. John said there were variations, but that was the essence of ghost stories. He mentioned one version where those who went to the courtyard found it filled with blood. June quickly asked if anyone survived in that version. John replied that it was safe to assume so, but reiterated that it was just a ghost story, questioning why June was so invested in it. June admitted it was true, but pointed out that John had stayed behind because he took the story seriously. John agreed that it had bothered him slightly and that an intercom shouldn't work during a blackout, so he thought it better to stay in the classroom. He then mused that maybe a backup system allowed the broadcast. June observed John's excitement, noting that he seemed like the type to show off his intelligence. His understanding of John increased by another 20 points. June opened his status window again, double-checking that it mentioned ghost stories and realizing he needed to figure out the connection. Sana chimed in, saying she found the ghost story interesting. June was surprised she spoke up, recalling she'd said she was slow, but didn't expect it to be this slow. He then realized he had been staring at her and quickly apologized. Just then, the principal began to speak over the intercom. A cold chill ran down June's spine as the principal's speech progressed, anticipating the gruesome head explosion. June closed his eyes, bracing himself, but the principal continued his speech normally. June was completely caught off guard and relieved. He realized he had survived this iteration of the entrance ceremony. A window popped up, declaring that he had encountered the broadcast ghost story and earned 5 GS points. June stretched dramatically over the desk, sighing loudly in relief. John jumped, asking what was wrong and if something had happened. June just laughed, saying John wouldn't believe him even if he told him. For some reason, the tutorial cleared, or perhaps he had misunderstood the window's meaning. He earned another 10 GS points and unlocked a status window. The entrance ceremony finally concluded. June opened his status window, seeing his disposition and quirk, along with an inventory slot. He was surprised by all the information, remarking that it really felt like a game with stats. He tapped on disposition to learn more. The window displayed a lengthy description, which the narrator summarized as indicating he was inconsistent and whimsical, depending on the situation, a complete wuss. It described his personality as iffy, with his only positive trait being his ability to think his way out of situations. He wondered why he had strayed so far from the tutorial's path, finding the description annoyingly accurate. He admitted he was the type to start things enthusiastically but rarely finish them, wondering if this was due to his disposition. It was like the window knew him better than he knew himself. He wondered if he could use the window to analyze others as well. He looked at John and opened his status window. It opened John's window, but much of the information was obscured by question marks. A bit of a wiki warrior, June thought, realizing John was exactly as he had perceived him. He then tried Sana's window, but it was entirely question-marked. Despite her seeming slow, she was only 16. He decided to try asking her about it later. He noted he received far less information on her, concluding it must be due to his low understanding level. Curious about the delinquent girl, Jean, he opened her status window. Her full name was Lee Jean, and her window was also completely blank, zero understanding. He hadn't expected much information, but was struck by how accurately the window knew information about him, even details he hadn't consciously considered. It knew everyone's names and ages, information he hadn't explicitly provided. The status window could see far beyond his own perception. He closed his eyes and recapped the situation. Inexplicably, ghost stories were becoming real. He had a game-like system only he could see, and like in a game, he could respawn after death. He was still unsure of the purpose of the GS points. The tutorial had mentioned making 3 friends, and it had cleared. John and Sana were likely too, but he wondered if Jean counted as the third, thinking it absurd. Delinquents using the word friend usually meant trouble, so he decided to be cautious around her. Their teacher, Daming, whose name June found amusingly generic, teacher in Korean, instructed them to carefully read the handouts. June glanced at the paper, finding most of it common sense, but his head ached, and he really didn't want to read anything. Some students, however, seemed concerned by the content. An announcement came over the broadcast, stating that the handouts had been printed incorrectly and would be collected. Their teacher, out of breath, rushed back into the room, confirming the mistake and instructing the students in the back to collect the handouts and return them to him. June glanced back at those students, wondering if there was something odd about them. Someone quickly snatched back the handout before he could read it. June thought it was incredibly fast, but dismissed it, figuring he could just ask John or Sana about it later. John admitted he hadn't bothered reading it. June was speechless at this, but Sana spoke up, saying that she had actually read the handouts. June asked Sana what the specific mistake in the handout was. She replied that the wording itself was correct, but it contained something peculiar. Both June and John pressed her for details. Sana explained that while she couldn't read the entire document, interspersed between the standard school policies was a warning about a particular woman referred to as the laughing woman, advising students to avoid her. She recalled that it provided details on how to be cautious around this woman, but Sana couldn't remember those specific instructions. June found this information strange and initially suspected it might be a prank, considering Sana might be slightly naive. John, however, recognized the description, stating that it referenced a popular ghost story. At this point, June realized the repeated mentions of ghost stories were unlikely to be mere coincidence and asked John to elaborate on this particular tale. John explained that the story was currently trending online and suggested it would be faster to simply show him. Mentioning they had exchanged numbers earlier, John said he would create a group chat and send a photo for June to examine. June's phone vibrated shortly after. John had sent an image resembling a contract or official document. This document outlined peculiar rules for an apartment complex supposedly built exclusively for the employees of a specific entity, later implied to be a pharmaceutical department. The rules included automatic rejection of applicants if any family member is religious, a requirement to surrender all time-telling devices, watches, phones, when submitting application documents, a clause stating that applications cannot be withdrawn due to hallucinations, hearing voices, or other health issues after moving in, a rule that the unit at the end of each hallway must always remain empty, and any lights or sounds emanating from it should be ignored, a statement that the building lacks a 4th floor due to religious reasons, accompanied by the chilling instruction to commit suicide if discovered on that non-existent floor, a prohibition on entering the stairwell at night, and a strict mandate to crawl on all fours if using the stairs becomes absolutely necessary. John then asked June if he grasped the context now. June, however, focused on the practical aspect, questioning why they needed to contact a pharmaceutical department and wondering aloud if it involved human experiments. John acknowledged that as one possible interpretation. June pushed for what John considered the right answer, assuming such a bizarre document must have a definitive explanation or conclusion. John glanced towards Sana, paused in thought, then explained to June that the nature of ghost stories is often their lack of clear endings or definite conclusions. He clarified that the document wasn't real but was simply an image someone had posted online, likely for shock value or attention, for Clover, as John put it, and thus had no actual resolution. June confirmed, asking if it was just a picture someone put up, and John affirmed this. June apologized, sensing that John didn't want to be perceived as uninformed. John then summarized the concept. These manual ghost stories work by subtly inserting unsettling warnings into otherwise ordinary-looking documents. June began to mull over the laughing woman, getting a distinct feeling that this was going to be another significant source of trouble. Meanwhile, outside the third-year hallways, the sound of a woman laughing could be heard as she walked past the classrooms. She held a box cutter and wore an unsettlingly wide, creepy smile. Their teacher, Daming, announced the end of the class for the day, reminding everyone to have their textbooks and to ensure they brought the correct ones based on the daily schedule. As the students began to leave for home, June overheard some classmates discussing the books. He laughed internally, thinking that based on his previous 3 years of high school experience, none of them were likely to even open their textbooks once they got home. Sana then called out to June, nervously attempting to say something. Sensing her intention, June asked if she wanted to walk home together. She replied with a cheerful yes. He then asked if John had already departed. Sana pointed towards John, who was still present, engaged in conversation with the student who had spent the class playing games. June internally dubbed them the fat and skinny duo, making a pop culture reference, Ornstein and Smuff. The final school bell rang, signaling the end of the day. June and Sana began walking together. He asked if her route took her left from the school gates, which she confirmed. He mentioned that he needed to go right, expressing a slight disappointment that their paths would diverge soon. As they continued walking, June contemplated the understanding stat shown in the status window. While it didn't display specific levels, it had indicated a need to increase his understanding of others. His current understanding of Sana was a mere 5 out of 100. He decided to try guessing facts about her to potentially raise the score. He started by mentioning that the apartment complex she lived in was likely over 30 years old and predominantly housed elderly residents, using this as a basis for deductions. He proceeded to make several blunt assumptions about her financial situation, essentially calling her poor in multiple different ways, but no update regarding his understanding level appeared on the window. He concluded that this direct guessing method wasn't effective and perhaps his choice of words was the issue. He tried again, repeating similar blunt statements about her being broke, but still received no feedback from the system. He realized that a more nuanced, deeper deduction was likely required. He then considered her personality traits. She acted slow and didn't speak much. He reasoned that while she could simply be naturally introverted, it was plausible that environmental factors contributed to her demeanor. He hypothesized that perhaps growing up in a poor home environment made social interaction difficult, gradually eroding her self-esteem and leading to her current timid nature. This line of thought immediately triggered an update. His understanding of Sana jumped by 30 points. He was surprised that this more complex deduction had actually worked. Just then, Sana called out to him, indicating they had reached the school gate. June noticed the security guard reprimanding a female student about her shoes, which reminded him of the previous loop where the guard was mobbed by panicked students. June and Sana exchanged goodbyes. As she turned to leave, he called out for her to wait. He seemed to struggle for the right words, then simply apologized to her. Walking home alone felt strangely nostalgic for June. In his experience timeline, it had been 3 years since he'd walked this route after the first day of school. He couldn't help but feel a bit excited, despite the circumstances. However, he soon realized he had overlooked a crucial detail. He approached his apartment building and went to ring the doorbell but abruptly stopped, struck by the realization that he had no idea which apartment unit his family currently lived in within this timeline. Fortunately, a woman was just exiting the building. June saw this as perfect timing and quickly slipped through the closing door. He made his way to his family's apartment and opened the door. The sight reminded him of his mother working as a cashier. Even though he had spent an additional 3 years with his parents in the timeline that ended with the Demon King's appearance, he felt their absence keenly in this present moment, deeply worried about their fate in that other reality, convinced they couldn't have survived unharmed. His attention was drawn to the table where he found some money alongside a note from his mother, telling him to buy himself something to eat. Reading the note brought a smile to his face, though he wryly commented on the amount, wondering where he could possibly buy chicken for such a low price. He grabbed something to eat from the refrigerator, savoring the comforting feeling of being home. He looked around the apartment, reflecting that although nothing disastrous had happened today, he hadn't been able to let his guard down at school. At least here, in the safety of his home, he could finally relax somewhat. He could finally relax, at least for a moment. Lying on the couch, June contemplated the terrifying image of the Demon King, wondering how anyone was supposed to fight something like that. He mused that this marked a completely new phase, a different kind of school experience. Even though he had already lived through 3 years of high school in a previous loop, this felt like an entirely fresh start. He sighed, realizing this meant enduring the national exams all over again, a thought that elicited a groan. Later, the buzz of the doorbell startled him. June leaped out of bed and rushed to the door to find his parents. They were surprised by his enthusiastic greeting, asking what had gotten into him and joking if he'd seen a ghost. He quickly denied it. His mother asked what he wanted for dinner, and he replied vaguely, telling her whatever she wanted, which only made her comment that he was acting strangely. Looking back at his system window, June noted it displayed second attempt, 13 GS points, and a casualty rate of 2%. Other information was visible, but he decided to focus on what seemed immediately relevant. He questioned the second attempt label, reasoning that his first death was the head explosion, and the second was facing the Demon King, making this technically his third attempt. However, he chose to ignore the discrepancy for now, along with the still unknown purpose of the GS points and the meaning of the casualty rate. The club feature remained locked. He clicked on the Statistics tab, revealing a detailed log of his time spent on various activities, including his number of deaths. He wryly wondered if the system was created by some kind of stalker. Next, he explored the Settings tab, which resembled standard video game options. Curious, he decided to experiment. He recapped his findings, adjusting the graphics settings, brightness, contrast, gamma, applied a filter-like effect to his vision, enhancing visibility in the dark. The audio options function like high-quality earplugs, dampening ambient noise. However, the control options proved problematic and clunky. Messing with them led to a bizarre situation where moving his foot caused his hand to move instead. He barely managed to reset the controls back to default. The next day at school, their teacher, Daming, announced they would be selecting permanent seats by drawing lots. June drew number 26 and walked over to his assigned spot. He noticed the girl sitting beside him and felt his heart flutter. She was strikingly pretty, far beyond someone he felt he could approach. But his luck wasn't that good. His actual deskmate was Smo. June greeted him politely, saying it was nice to meet him. Smo smiled and replied. June recognized him as the student John had been hanging out with. His name was Od Duan, and seeing him increased June's understanding of him by 15 points. June decided to ask Duan about the handout from the previous day. Even though Sana had provided some information, he wanted to gather as many details as possible. Duan pushed up his glasses, snorted, and asked if June meant the warning about the laughing woman. June found his mannerisms odd and gave him a look of disappointment. Duan advised him that if he encountered the laughing woman, he should absolutely not pretend to know her. He then added "no good" in Japanese for emphasis. June instantly regretted initiating the conversation, thinking he should have just spoken to Sana instead. He walked over to Sana's desk, noting she had been late that day. She explained that her grandma had woken her up late. He asked if she had spoken to her deskmate yet, and she confirmed she hadn't. June decided to introduce himself to the deskmate. She looked up at him, and he noted her prettiness, inwardly wishing again that he wasn't stuck with Smo. She introduced herself as In Hyun. June apologized for the sudden question but asked if she remembered the handout and the strange warning it contained. Hyun confirmed it was certainly weird, recalling the instruction, if you spot a woman smiling strangely on campus, turn a blind eye and ignore her until she passes by. She chuckled, remarking how creepy it sounded, seemingly looking for his agreement. June, however, was mostly surprised she remembered the details so clearly. He thought that this ghost story would likely manifest soon and wondered if he should actively look for the woman, but then recalled the warnings. Don't pretend to know her and don't intentionally seek her out. Just then, Sana's stomach rumbled loudly. Hyun glanced at Sana, as did June. Sana quickly became embarrassed. June guessed she hadn't eaten breakfast and suggested they go to the cafeteria during the break. Later, at the crowded school convenience store, June questioned if they could even buy anything before the break ended, given the long line. Sana admitted she wasn't sure. June decided it was better to try than not. He grabbed an item and asked Sana what she wanted. She looked nervous, but before she could answer, their attention was diverted by an argument nearby. Some students were arguing about pushing. One guy, denying involvement, turned around angrily, only to find himself face to face with a tall woman who was laughing incessantly. Students nearby wondered what was wrong with her, speculating she might be crazy. Suddenly, the laughing woman shouted "No" very loudly and slashed her box cutter across the arguing student's face with shocking speed. His head flew across the room. The woman continued laughing, unfazed by the murder she had just committed. June looked over in horror, his and Sana's hearts sinking. Sana covered her mouth in shock. Panic erupted as the other students screamed and scrambled to escape. The woman kept laughing, extending her box cutter, and continued her killing spree, slicing through students rapidly, sending heads flying. June confirmed to Sana that this was definitely the woman from the handouts, her relentless laughing and slaughter confirming her identity. She decapitated students left and right. June grabbed Sana's hand and pulled her away, telling her they needed to reach the window behind the counter. He frantically recalled the printout's instructions, wondering how anyone could possibly ignore her when she was killing indiscriminately. He helped Sana climb through the window first, but she suddenly froze, pointing behind him and yelling. June turned to see the laughing woman terrifyingly close. She got right in his face and lunged, aiming straight for his eye, killing him instantly. The familiar message appeared: he would restart from a previous checkpoint. He respawned back inside the classroom. His first thought was dread that he might be back on the entrance ceremony day, but looking up, he saw the lights were on. He checked his phone, seeing recent YouTube notifications, confirming he had only returned to earlier that same morning. He wondered what triggered the checkpoint change this time. Recalling his death, he felt a phantom pain in his eye. This was absolutely not a dream, it was reality, and he needed to face it. He remembered Smo's advice to ignore her and Hyun's recollection to act casual and turn a blind eye. He let out a long sigh, questioning how he was supposed to do that when she was actively murdering everyone around her.